Let's be honest here, survival horror has lost its way. Resi has gone all gungasms and backslaps, Dead Space has swapped shadows for shooting, and these days Silent Hill is a wet Wednesday of disappointment. That's why we're pumped about legendary developer Shinji Mikame wrapping an awful sack of excitement in barbed wire and promising to make all our nightmares flesh. Here are 7 reasons why the evil within, known as Psycho Break in Japan, will save survival horror. First up, we've got the cast. Now, why is that important? Well, because Mikame is the man that made every single Resi character a household name, and if you don't care about the characters, you don't care if they die. You'll play a detective named Sebastian Castellanos, and although he's clearly capable, he's deliberately more of an everyman than the running, gunning heroes we've seen in recent survival horror offshoots. Think the original Isaac Clarke, or a naive Leon Kennedy. Joining him is his partner Joseph Oda and Julie Kid Kidman, but you'll be split up from them early on in the game. We expect that reuniting them may end up being part of the story unless they've already been horribly killed. Always a possibility. The team starts off in pursuit of a brutal murderer, which takes them to the mental asylum that forms part of the setting of the game. So, what about the setting in general? Well, the most iconic Resi games have environments that will remain burned onto our retinas forever, and we're hoping for the same from this. And, much like Resident Evil 4, the evil within is intended to be a deeply cinematic experience. The camera is still over the shoulder, but it's slung low, so you absorb the full scale of each grueling environment. Now, everything has a deliberately theatrical twist, focusing on a consistent air of mystery rather than jarring dramatic twists. Things will kick off in a very trad horror looking asylum, followed by a section in a hospital. We've also seen exterior sections and an abandoned village, and the variation between tight claustrophobic areas and wide open space is there to provide a cycle of fear and relief. The fact that it's not a one-note, balls-to-the-wall horror all the way through makes us think that this could be grueling in all the right ways. Remember how horrible it was fighting your first zombie in Resident Evil? Well, apparently the original dev team questioned Mikame on why Special Forces operatives were so slow at firing their handguns, but he insisted that it was all part of the horror. Tellingly, you can expect more of the same here. The interval of terror, as we've named it, will be what turns this from a mindless run and gunner into an edgy battle for survival. The controls will be another survival horror throwback, in that they're still pushing for the cinematic feel of Resi 4, but it won't be at the expense of mobility. In fact, much of the tension will come from you having more mobility. Sneaking and crouching will be a big part of the game, and your movements will differ depending on the proximity of enemies. Mikame has admitted that he made Sebastian a detective to get some gunplay into the game, but it's certainly not the sole focus. Resources are limited, so you'll often have to improvise to survive, making use of the many traps that are littered around the nightmarish environment. The most obvious pop culture analogy would be the Saw films, but please don't hate us for saying it. Okay, next up is an element that excites us the most. This game is going to thoroughly brown your trousers. Mikame accepts that these days it's hard to frighten people, and that's why he's created an average schmo who he hopes will resonate with gamers. As well as the sinister environments, the evil within puts you on the edge by throwing genuinely unexpected shocks at you. The environment will occasionally shift, changing its layout in a cerebral Silent Hill way. One scene sees a wave of blood crashing down a corridor, much like the elevator scene in The Shining. Hopefully, this is just the tip of a deeply unsettling iceberg. The incidental nature of the horror also gives the game a real edge. Sebastian is deliberately thrust into the world against his will, because Mikame believes the game would be less scary if you had a solid, tangible goal. Forget solving crimes, your primary focus in the evil within is to remain alive. Our next reason is a very general one, and it relates to the entire presentation of the game. Looking at the screens we've seen so far, there's a definite cinematic feel to everything, with a real sense of tone. Now, in order to maintain this, the game has a minimalist hub intended not to detract from the pant-bothering immersion. For example, your health bar is very small, and your ammo is only shown when the weapon is actually drawn. The story itself also helps to develop this overarching feeling of synergy. Gameplay isn't prioritised over story, and Mikame wants to encourage players not to skip the cutscenes. The narrative will be deeply embedded into the gameplay without affecting the tempo. if The Evil Within could deliver the drama of heavy rain alongside a compelling supernatural storyline, we'll consider all our terror boxes well and truly ticked. Many of horror's most iconic bad guys have crawled out of the imagination of Shinji Mikame. Think lickers, tyrants, and sack-headed chainsaw men. And The Evil Within shows no sign of that twisted imagination running dry. Standard enemies include the slow, shambling undead types, we're deliberately avoiding the Z word here, and we've also seen a fresh chainsaw-wielding enemy known as the Butcher. Although, anyone that's tried will know that chainsaws are a deeply inefficient way of preparing meat. If you've seen the trailer, you'll also have caught a glimpse of a Wraith, a multi-legged, multi-armed she-beast straight out of your J-horror nightmares. The fact that we're already being teased with these monstrosities is providing the same tantalising build-up we had when finding out about the Tyrant, or Code Veronica's Nosferatu. It's not a case of if you'll fight these horrors, but when. Our final point is an odd one, since the stuff we've seen could hardly be described as original, but in the context of AAA game development, The Evil Within is a bit of a risk. The wang-waving heroics of Resident Evil 6 allowed it to shift 5 million copies, which Capcom still saw as a disappointment, and the likes of Dead Space 3 tell us that pure survival horror is considered to be a risk for publishers. The fact that the game is a wholly new IP also meant that The Evil Within was difficult to get off the ground, but we're pleased that Bethesda have been willing to take the plunge. The Evil Within is due out in 2014 on PC and assorted consoles, meaning that we can expect it on current and next-gen machines. Stay tuned to CVG for further updates, and please like if you're excited about the game, or dislike it if this isn't really your thing. Remember to rate, comment and subscribe, and we'll see you next week for another Rumour Mill.